on the beach in Cape Town.
Colin, your internet's actually
Thanks to Obi.
shaky.
I'm in Cape Town.
Can you tell him
It
his
is. Let me see if I could do anything about that.
They were
Hold
live.
on. Let me see if I could do anything about that. Hold on.
We were live.
Yeah, should I go live?
Yeah, I think we're live now.
All right, guys. So welcome everybody to this panel. Today's our music panel. Black is King of Culture and Rhythm. My name is OkayAfrica, and this is the Africa Soft Power Project, a movement focused on how the continent can optimize its creative industries, knowledge economy, and harness its soft power effectively to propel itself forward while championing the inclusion of African voices and the voices of the global Black community in global discourse. This May edition, titled The Bridge, the Past, the Present, and the Future, has been specifically timed to begin on Africa World Heritage Day, May 5th, and end on Africa Day, May 25th. Our objective is to establish the celebration of Africa's contemporary industries within wider global conversations, and we therefore invite the whole world to join the celebration of May as Africa Month. This session is Black as King of Culture and Rhythm. From hip hop to Afrobeats, jazz, blues, gospel, reggae, dancehall, rock and roll to soul and R&B, Black consciousness and culture have shaped the trajectory of global music for centuries. Have we arrived at the point where the world realizes the outsized impact of Black people in pop culture, music and dance? And how do we grow the connection between music scenes and leverage digital marketplaces within Africa and the global Black music industry and the music industry in general? Joining us in what we're sure will be an invaluable conversation are Shay, who will be joining us a bit later, Msia Kibona, our professor of hip hop, Colin, Gayle, Rufaro, Samanga, and we can't wait to listen to their insights and perspectives. The conversation will be led by the phenomenal Rob Marriott, award-winning journalist, author, producer, and filmmaker. Excited to have him here with us. I also like to thank the audience for being here today, and of course, big thanks to our media and strategic partners.
I'm very excited to be here. I think we
lost Obi.
We lost Obi, but here we are to talk about the most exciting soft power Africa has, I think, which is music. And we talk about it in the most exciting time for it. I think when you look across the globe and look at what is happening in Black music, from the Caribbean, from the continent, from the all of Africa's children, South Africa, Brazil, etc. This is one of the most exciting times because of this kind of conflation of not only revolutionary sound and production and technology being available to the people who produce the music, but also the ability to distribute in ways that were never available before. So we're hearing new voices, new sounds, new ideas, new concepts, and it's having an enormous influence on the world. From the TikTok dances that start with all the Afrobeat movements and the dancehall movements and the movements from the South to people like Wizkid and Burna Boy and Naira Marley and Tiwa Savage, bringing these new African voices to the world stage. And I think a good premise that we should start is with one of our fathers in Black music and African music, Fela Kuti, where he said, music is a weapon. So with that premise, I would like everyone to kind of introduce themselves briefly and answer the question: if music is a weapon, who are our new generals? Who are the generals for you in this time? Let's start with our professor, Msia. Who do you think is leading the charge? And tell us a little about yourself briefly.
Definitely, thank you. I mean, and it's exciting to be on a panel with, I've kind of was talking about this with industry insiders because this is a new forum for me. I'm usually kind of talking to other academics and the conversation is usually kind of dry. So this is exciting. So my background, I teach in the African Studies Department at Howard University. And so I focus on hip hop culture in Africa. And lately, specifically looking at the way women in hip hop have, specifically women artists, have used hip hop to kind of challenge patriarchy and sexism and all of those things, and the way hip hop artists in Africa use hip hop as a tool for social commentary. So, in my view, the generals are MCs, lyricists specifically, and definitely kind of looking at the difference between a rapper and an MC. KRS-One, using his kind of definition. And, I've kind of looked at, and I know, Afrobeats is really popular now, but when we look at political content, and when you mentioned Fela, I definitely think for political content, the next Fela is going to be an MC.
Let's have Colin take on this question. Who are the new generals, and what's your background, and what brings you to this table?
So my name is Colin Gayle. I'm the CEO and founder of Africa Creative Agency. We're an agency similar to like a CAA or William Morris. We focus primarily on representing creatives. So anything from an actor to a director, to musician, to a rapper, to an MC, to an influencer, so across the board. We have offices in Kenya and in South Africa, UK, and US. So to answer your next question, a little back up. I came here in 2004 as a guest of Obi's and a couple of my good friends, and just fell in love with the continent. Rob, everyone fell in love with the space and just kind of stayed in the space for the last 16, 17 years, and then moved here 3 years ago to South Africa. I agree with the doctor that it is going to be the MC. I think Afrobeat has actually slowed that context down. And I think there was a lot of MCs coming out of Nigeria, coming out of South Africa. It wasn't resonating globally. It wasn't really, I can't say it was really resonating. It was resonating some level locally. I think Afrobeat came in and it was this thing that just took off, right? And every MC became an Afrobeat artist, right? Even if by default, right? That's what was working, and hip hop wasn't working, right? So I think the generals have been like MI. I think Nasty C is one of those. I think that is young and different. He's not political, but there are different kind of politics that take in play today. It's not the straight approach of a fella or a Bob or whatever. They approach it differently. So for me, I would say selfishly Nasty C, because obviously I represent him. But I would say MI, because I'm a huge fan of MI, right? So I would say MI. I think he was at the forefront of the conversation, right? And you got young kids like Blackie that are making a lot of noise on that are new. So if you talk about MCs, you got Nowinski coming out of East Africa. So there's quite a few young cats that are really making noise that are true to the genre of hip hop, that are true to and are not trying to do a version of Afrobeat hip hop, but they're sticking true to the core message or the core musical or the genre, basically. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, the relationship between Afrobeat and hip hop, because I think hip hop as a genre really set Africa up to become a very central place for new music going forward. But I wanted to pass this to Rufaro to introduce herself and also answer the question who she thinks is leading this charge.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Rufaro Samanga, and I'm a multimedia journalist and the staff writer for OkayAfrica, the sister company to OkayAfrica, and we're basically looking at highlighting culture, be it music, literature, film, just across the space in arts and culture on the continent, as well as the diaspora. My work tends to focus a lot on women, whether it's women in music, women in literature, women in film, women's issues, gender-based violence in South Africa. I think I'd have to agree with the panelists before me, just in terms of who the generals are. I think in as much as we've seen the rising popularity of Afrobeats as a whole, I still do think that MCs are probably the generals. I would also say Nasty C. He's probably, you know, what we term the creme de la creme of the South African hip hop community. I'd also say Stogie T. I think sometimes Stogie T is, you know, somewhat of an underdog, but I think in terms of being someone who's very socially and politically conscious, especially in terms of his music, I think that he's an important MC. But I also think that aside from the veterans, the new wave of MCs is very important. So just from a South African standpoint, people like D. Koala, someone like Rouge or Nadia Nakai, I do think that the new wave has the potential to kind of surprise us in the space. So yeah, I would say MCs and the new wave, definitely our generals so far as this, you know, conversation is concerned.
Yeah, I think that there's a consensus on how, you know, powerful hip hop has been for us as you know, as global Africans. I think it's you know, to introduce myself as well. Like, you know, I primarily consider myself a writer. That's how I started, but I've been a producer and a DJ, and been fortunate to live on the continent for 10 years. Colin been introduced and fell in love with not just the shape of Africa, but, you know, the actual reality on the ground and the culture. But I identify as a Brooklyn Jamaican. You know, I'm a Brooklyn chauvinist. You know, I think we're top of the food chain, and the reason I love Brooklyn so much is because it is a diasporic city. It's a truly Pan-African city, and hip hop had to come out of a Pan-African context because it's, you know, it's the latest psychological technology of Black people learning how to use culture to change their situation and fight all kinds of oppressions. And now we see people using that vehicle all over the world. You know, it's the common language for young people, you know, no matter where you go, be it, you know, in Korea or South Africa or Brazil. And, you know, now we're here where, you know, technology has given so much power to people. So, you know, if I was to answer the question of who I think generals are, you know, I think Beyonce is, you know, probably our leading general in, you know, pushing against the, you know, or fighting this war of perception of who Black people are, who, you know, who we are to ourselves, what we look like, what we sound like, where our power lies. You know, I think she's leading the charge in many ways. And I think it's interesting because hip hop, while it was accused of you know, being against women for so long, or having a very kind of adversarial relationship with women, in recent times we see women taking charge, be it Nicki Minaj or Cardi B. I wonder what the panel thinks about, you know, how gender plays in this new wave. Let's go to Msia to kind of start that conversation.
Well, I definitely think that South Africa is, and has been for probably almost at least a decade, really a space where, a hip hop space where I've seen the most active women, the most active in terms of on the mic, and the most diverse. So the most diverse representation of women in hip hop, but also the most kind of the largest number of women MCs. So you've got, you know, women, of course, like Nadia Nakai. You've also got like Gigi Lamaine and Rouge, who lyrically are just fierce. You've got artists like Dope St. Jude, who's one of the first out queer artists out of South Africa. You've got Kanye Mavi, who raps in Xhosa. You've got Yugen Blackrock, who was on the Black Panther soundtrack on the song with Vince Staples and Kendrick Lamar. You've got like Muesli, who's the newer artist. I mean, there's just like so Miss Super and Miss Santabi, who are kind of like artists that were, you know, gone for a while, who've come back. So you've got like so many artists in South Africa that are kind of like, but they're also diverse. And so they're not following a specific.
Is there a reason why there's such a groundswell of female MCs?
I would say, honestly, you know, South Africa's protest culture in general has kind of given this space for people to express themselves in a very strong way. Like one of the things on our podcast, the Hip Hop African podcast, we interviewed Gigi Lamaine, and she describes feminism in South Africa as very gangster. And so she said South African feminism is gangster. And so I think that is one of the reasons. So women are very kind of, you know, yeah.
You make me flash back to Winnie Mandela's funeral, and I thought about her and her influence on the country. Like, she's truly the mother of New South Africa, and she was so gangster and, you know, powerful. You know, Nelson always gets kind of like the most shine, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, you know, Winnie was so critical to, you know, the revolution that happened in South Africa. Colin, what?
I'll add to that. It's interesting because, I start backwards from the Mandela comment, and if you look at Mandela, he was married to two very incredible women, right? That were all feminists, right? Like you know, Gracia Michelle is a beast, you know, when it comes to women in power. So I think that's a good example of the woman behind the man, right? And so I think it's you know, that was shown. I think just to add to what the doctor was saying, I said, you know, if you look at even Zimbabwe with Awa, Hannah, Lioness, you know, I mean, the southern space has just delivered a lot of MCs. And if you talk about the female MCs, it's like, Rob, you and I are both Jamaican, right? And you know those women from Coronation Market, right? Those haggler women that, you know, don't take no crap, right? Like, will drag a man up in his collar and you know, and show him the right way. I think South African women, what they talk about gangster, what Gigi's talking about, is that they are gangster. You know, they have had to come from a different position to take, you know, control, you know, and I think it's indicative if you hear the female rappers out of the space, but when you peel it back a lot, you know, like Rouge is from the Congo, right? When you start peeling it back, because South Africa is a melted space, right? So there's a lot of intersections of culture that are coming together into the space, right? So there's a beautiful around music and around things that are happening in South Africa that gets labeled South Africa, but a lot of times it's a little bit deeper. There's another layer to it that we don't see. I think that the female MCs are going to come really strong. I think there's a huge space for it. I think somebody just mentioned Brenda Fassie. I mean, you don't get more gangster than that, right? In the context of power, right? And women like Amanda Black. There's so many of these women, and I think South Africa. One of the things that apartheid produced was a very strong feminist movement, a very strong liberal movement, right? In the context that South Africa is very accepted of all things, right? On a surface level, at some level, but yeah, politically very accepting of a lot of things, right? And so I think that's bred a lot of really strong women with strong voices that are not afraid to express themselves. I think hip hop is going to be the next wave that is about to happen. I think Afrobeat is going to change. It's going to become more melodic, more verse hook, a little bit more structured, a little bit more. I think that's where Afrobeat's gonna run up into R&B, and they're gonna do something really interesting. Just the sound I'm hearing on everyone's albums that's coming out this year. So I think we're in a really interesting space musically, where I think we're gonna have an opportunity to express ourselves, not just the way that the world thinks that we are. Because right now the world thinks that we're Afrobeat, and that's pretty much where it stops, right? And I think artists like Tyler, who's doing like an Afro pop dance thing, is going to change that game tremendously. You know, the dance music in Africa is incredible. It is better, but it's just not branded. Once it leaves South Africa, it leaves Niger, it leaves Kenya, no one knows it's from the continent. They just think it's Chicago or New York house or Newark house or whatever. So I think we're about to go into a really incredible space.
Yeah, I agree. I think the branding and the labeling of the music has been very difficult. I know. I remember, talking with Burna Boy, and he was, he really pushed against this idea that it was Afrobeats. He preferred Afrofusion. And there's a real issue at how Africa and African music brands itself, because so much gets lost in translation. But there needs to be a kind of unifying principle that puts all these different kinds of artists, in the biggest on the biggest platform possible. But I want to stay on the topic of women, because what you see in the U.S. with the Cardi B's and the mulattoes and obviously Nicki Minaj and those kind of MCs is all the energy right now is with female MCs. And I remember watching Black is King with like a 2-year-old girl, a baby, and she was entranced with My Power, the where Beyonce kind of ends and brings the South African MCs in. And I saw what the purpose of Black is King is, because the little girl is now forming her ideas about the world with these really, really powerful African images that, Beyonce was able to draw, not just from the music, but from the visuals and the traditions and the religion, and on and on and on. It was very, very layered. And now you have a wave of female artists who don't see themselves as less than equal. Women are taking their rightful position as leaders, not just in music, but in the world in general. I wonder if you could speak to that, Rufaro.
Sure, and I think it goes, or it kind of piggybacks off what we were just talking about right now, especially in the South African scene. So because of our political history, that has not just informed female MCs or just the hip hop space, but a lot of genres, right? Because of struggle veterans, because they were struggle veterans in their own right, not just wives to icons like, Steve Biko, Nelson Mandela, and all the other male political icons that are sort of always seen at the front. I think in people like Uwini and people like Charlotte Maxeke, there was a refusal to be erased, right, first and foremost. And they were very steadfast in their politics as women and particularly as feminists, right? And I think that spirit has lived on, which is why you'll hear a lot of South Africans say, Uwini did not die, she multiplied. That spirit has lived on in a lot of women, and not just in MCs, but people like Usimpiwe Dana. She's an R&B soul contemporary. Someone like Uthandiswa Mazwai, who was part of Bongo Muffin. They've regrouped recently, but mostly as a solo artist, she's been very steadfast about what she stands for politically and societally as an artist. Someone even like Ubusiswa and Moonchild Saneli, who were featured on Beyonce's Black is King. Busiswa is very steadfast in singing and sometimes rapping in Xhosa, right? Because that is her mother tongue. And I think that is a statement in and of itself to say, I'm not going to make music, or at least most of my music in English, I'm going to make music in my mother tongue, right? And she's still a very much revered and popular artist in South Africa. The same with Moonchild. She might be a bit more cross-genre as an artist, but her brand, so to speak, is being very firm about her sexuality, being unafraid to sort of own that, and almost to some people kind of throw it in your face. But I think there's sort of like a reclamation that is constantly happening among female South African artists. And that is basically, or primarily, because of the political history, particularly of the women in South Africa, especially. And so that was just the point that I wanted to get. And please just repeat your recent question now, kind of got lost there.
Well, I mean, as you talk about it, and I, we think about like that era, with Winnie Mandela, and, in the US, it was like a Fannie Lou Hamer or Angela Davis, Assata Shakur. There was the 60s, the 60s and 70s was this era where, Black politics, global Black politics, independent movements on the continent, and resistance movements in the West, found people really using culture and imagery and branding. The Black Panthers were like, it was like this really powerful branding, right? You don't see that in politics in the same way anymore, outside of maybe, Black Lives Matter is a really powerful branding thing. But when you talk about politics real time, politicians, have stepped back. You don't have the same level of like, fiery resistance. Obama and Kamala Harris represent a kind of new approach. And I think because of that, the resistance falls to the musicians. Music now has to take another kind of role, because the politicians, frankly, had failed us. African leadership has not stepped to the plate in terms of taking on the people who are trying to destroy us in the ways that, now the music kind of has to take that role on. I mean, I wonder, Colin, how you as someone who's bringing new artists to the table and dealing on that kind of, how artists are constructed in this corporate environment now, what role do you feel like you play in that, like being part of like a movement or a power situation where, Black people actually gain more than lose, in the history of Blacks in music is that we don't actually get what we deserve considering what we give to the world?
I think music is critical, right? At every intersection in our history, music has played a key part in the conversation, in the awareness of what is happening. Music has always been just a kind of just kind of told what was going on in the hood or in the neighborhood, or what was going on with our people, what our struggles were. Music has always been that, right? I think the reason we're all paying attention to the continent isn't because of the oil or anything else in the ground. It's because of the music. Why we're all on this panel is the music. The music is what started this. Like, I won't mention this platform, but I had a dinner with this platform last night, and I was basically saying to them, you guys are skipping to go make really great movies, and I think they're really important. But please don't forget how this hip hop and this storytelling thing really happened, right? And how it became global is because we took our music and then we made them into movies, and we kind of told a bigger story that became impactful, that became global, right? So I think music, we started with Afrobeat, which wasn't a message-driven vehicle. It was a rhythmic vehicle, right? It wasn't driven with messages, not those kind of messages. I think that hip hop is going to come along now and really address a lot of things. I think we're out of the mumble. I think we're about to come out of the mumble rap phase, right? I think we're going to get into something a little bit more interesting. So I think music is going to be critical. I think if you talk about the connection, I think one of the things we talked about was making this global, right? Is that if you look at Miriam Makeba, right? If you look at her and how she impacted North America, African Americans in particular, right? With the Afro, with the whole nine, that connection was critical, right? If you sit down with Yvonne, Chaka Chaka, and all of them, and they tell you that rich history of the connection between North America, between the UK, between all these different entities, and how we all came, sorry guys, my dog, sorry. How we all kind of came together, I think it's critical. So I think music, to answer your question, I think music is critical. I think there is a voice of the young MCs that are coming up, both female and male. I think it is with the platforms that are now on the ground in Africa. See, a part of our issue has been that we've been doing extraction, right? So we create something popular, the world comes and extracts that thing and then takes it to the world, but it does nothing for the place, that it was extracted from, right? I think why this may be different this time around is that with Spotify and with Apple and all the platforms that are on the continent, we hopefully can build a strong enough economic base to be able to actually build an industry on the continent, because right now we're in extraction mode, right? Every major is extracting the artists out. And those artists are actually ignoring Africa media and Africa press, and they're leaning into European press and North American press, right? So we're going through this extraction model that's currently happening, right? I think that's something that we have to be aware that hip hop has to kind of address, right? Because we are 1 billion strong. We're bigger than America if we actually got it. So I'm about to get off subject, but to answer your question, I think music.
I think that is the subject that, I think price point is the revolution, because, how do we determine what the value of these musics, what the value of these artists are? When I look at TikTok, for example, so many of the dances that became viral off of TikTok or off of, white girls doing these dances, that they're doing African dances or hip hop dances. And they literally, change their lives based on the money that they can accrue from doing these dances. But so often the people who originate the dance don't take part in that economy. And they're as you said, that they're extracted, and it doesn't gain value until someone else does it. Until, I remember there was this debate of when Kanye came out and said he was worth 6.6 billion, Forbes came out to, deny that and say, oh, he's really worth 1.8 billion. and you know, a lot of those numbers are fuzzy. But in reality, if we think about what Kanye brings to the table, he's worth 20 billion or more. You know what I mean? And you know, I think, you know, all of us as global Africans have to now readjust how we look at ourselves and what the value truly is, you know, and we have to find a way to start talking about a Burna Boy or a Stormzy or a Naira Marley or a Rima, and not just talk about it as someone who can influence a Drake, you know what I mean? But people who in and of themselves are highly valuable, and that price point has to be reassessed. I mean, Msia,
add to that really, Rob. I'd just like to add to that really quickly, not to take over too much, but I think we're getting there. I think we all are. I'm impatient because obviously I've been in the game for a long time, so I'm impatient. But actually being in the game for a long time actually realized the changes that have happened. Right? I know that we didn't have a way to sell our music 6 months ago, if not 4 months ago. It was only Apple and a few platforms that were really local that really weren't paying out. Now you got Spotify and Apple in every country. Okay, so now what we need to do is turn inwards, move off of, I won't say this one platform because it'll get me in trouble, but move to platforms that pay better, that highlight the commerce around our culture, right? And I think that's really important because we're still only 1 or 2% of the game, right? We add all the flavor. But when you look at the numbers, we're nowhere off the grip, right? We're not there, right? And unfortunately, Burna Boy's numbers and all those guys' numbers don't actually speak to the continent. He's signed to a UK label. It speaks to the UK numbers. It actually doesn't speak to any African numbers because he's signed to the UK. He's signed to UK and the US. He's not signed to any label in Africa. So those numbers don't go to a bottom line conversation when you look at data, right? So Nasty C is signed to Def Jam in America. You know what I mean? So I'm just giving you like, so when we look at numbers and guys in tall office buildings look at it, you know, they don't see our power because we have sold our power off consistently to the highest bidder outside of another space, right? But I think that our artists are becoming a lot smarter. I think there was a lot of mistakes we made in hip hop in America and in urban culture in general that I think we can learn from. There is an advantage to being last at the table, right? There's a huge advantage if we are studying history and not just repeating, you know, things that have happened before that didn't work. So if we're studying, and I think the connection between African Americans and Africans and Caribbeans and South Americans are critical because there's lessons that have happened in each one of our spaces that if we are together, we will avoid a lot of mistakes. We will be able to impart information upon each other so that we can skip over some of the baby steps and get to something a lot more critical. And I think I see it happening, not just on the music side, but I see it happening on the film and TV side. I really see, I mean, just this year, I think we're in May, we have placed, I don't know, I think 39 songs in movies that are African songs from the continent into global movies, not local movies. And so I think there is a shift. Now, so I'm just want us to make sure that we recognize that there is a change, right? Although it's slow, there is a change. I think that we need to get the economics right. We don't have a touring industry. African artists need to embrace African media. It's critical. We're not doing it. 90% of these artists will ignore an interview from Uganda, but you can call some guy from Switzerland from somewhere you don't even know, and you'll jump on that interview in 30 seconds and spend an hour and a half with some dude, right? I get it. I mean, I get it. You know, euros is better than euros is better than whatever the currency in Uganda is, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I saw that happen, you know, having started with hip hop journalism at The Source and Double XL and Vibe and so on. Like, the artists would come to us, you know, desperate to get that 5 mic review. And you know, because we're the first and kind of pioneered it, we got access to those artists. But when Rolling Stone and you know, these other publications started to pay attention late in the game, suddenly the hip hop journals were second or third or fourth on the list for access to those artists. So there's a similar problem that, you know, you speak to. And I think a lot of it has to do with like local markets versus global markets, and how Africa has been split up and divided, so that, you know, an artist from, you know, Senegal or an artist from, you know, Angola can't get the global platform that someone who's signed to a UK or to the US can get. I mean, Msia, how do you look at the issue of, you know, local artists versus global artists, and how, you know, a global African artist can negotiate the infrastructure issues that we have across the globe?
Well, I think a lot of it is, you know, being able to navigate social media and technology. I think social media and digital media have really opened up a lot of doors. So if you're able to really kind of navigate that, those waters, and of course, you know, there are a lot of folks that are in that space kind of vying for attention. So it can be tough. But I would say that one of the things in terms of looking at the visibility of artists and how artists got onto huge projects like Black Panther and Black is King, and, you know, I know that there were some artists on the Coming to America soundtrack, is the presence of a lot of African immigrants in the US. So you had kind of that wave of Africans coming to the States since the 80s. And I'll you know, always use the example of Blitz the Ambassador, who came to the States in 2000 for school, stayed, you know, didn't get signed. No one wanted to sign him. He created his own label and kind of climbed through, you know, the ranks. And, you know, he ended up releasing an independent film. They got picked up by Ava DuVernay's distribution. He was a creative director on Black is King. He, you know, is now, I think, doing a novel, and he was also supposed to be doing the film version of The Color Purple. And so, but on that project, on the Black is King project, he was also able to kind of bring that Ghanaian cultural presence there to help kind of authenticate that on that project. And so I think kind of those things are happening. You know, people who are at Netflix, one of the individuals who at least one at Netflix for international programming has been Nigerian, who has helped kind of bring in Nigerian films. Because I know when the first kind of African films were coming onto Netflix, they were Nigerian films. I mean, now I think there's some South African films, and now there's some kind of Netflix original films. So you're having all of this visibility, but a lot of it is also due to the presence of African immigrants in conversation with African Americans, West Indians, who are in these spaces together and who are collaborating on these projects together, and who are kind of bringing these multiple, you know, Black perspectives to these spaces and recognizing the importance of that. So I think that is, and you're seeing the same thing in England, the grime scene. Like, you know, yes, people talk about the Black Brits, but those Black Brits are like second, third generation African West Indian immigrants. So all of that, I think, when you look at global Black music, the African, West Indian, African American contribution is, you know, can't be overstated.
Yeah, I think that there's actually a dichotomy, really, when we talk about this new wave of African culture and diasporic culture that's gaining so much influence, because you have the people on the continent who are, you know, creating new sounds and fashion and so on. And then you have the immigrant children which is a separate movement in a way that is cross-fertilizing with all the other diasporic populations. I think that's when we really look at it, like if you talk about Africa's soft power, you know, it's really that unity, that these new consensus that are being created, you know, because, you know, dancehall in Jamaica, they made so many advances in how to brand this kind of content that Africa learned from it, you know, and you see a lot of like, you know, artists like Shatta Wale or Pata Ranking, they're using the advances that, you know, the older Jamaican artists developed to kind of promote the brand of reggae across the world. And, you know, it's given tools to Tiwa Savage or to, you know, other kinds of artists to now have a way, you know, I think a Stonebwoy or someone like that. So understanding that, you know, that unity and these new consensuses that technology is kind of offering us, you know, I think we're on it. I was telling Obi earlier that, you know, these bridges are being built and that bridge is made of coltan, you know what I mean? We all are now finding like-minded people, you know, with a keystroke, you know, and this conversation is part of that. I mean, I don't know, Rufaro, what do you think in terms of these new consensus? Do you find that you are finding unity, or, you know, is technology, you know, creating more divisions than they are unity? Because I see both sides of it.
I think, as with anything, there's usually two sides or even more sides to it. You know, I think that technology has been, from my perspective at least, you know, leading to a lot of unity. Just if you look at, for example, the End SARS protests against police brutality in Nigeria, social media and technology really played a pivotal role, because what many African countries have resorted to are internet shutdowns or partial internet shutdowns, right? In an effort to restrain people from getting the message out there about what's happening on the ground, right? Had it not been for technology, had it not been for social media, we wouldn't have seen much of what was happening on the ground in terms of the protests, in terms of how the police were using violence against protesters. So I think in terms of those settings, technology is really a unifier, because when it comes to people trying to sort of get the word out there in terms of what's happening on the ground in their various countries, I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, right? I think social media as a function of technology is incredibly important. And I think Africans are learning to harness it a lot more. I think case in point is a young man, Nigerian man, based in Lagos. His name is Heiser. And I think a few months ago, you know, he was just freestyling and the video went viral, and Drake happened to, you know, see it. And he was, you know, really a fan of this young man. And he was just like, you know, keep doing what you're doing. Really amazing work. He followed him on Instagram. And, you know, recently I was working on Heiser's artist biography, you know, because now he's linked up with Universal Music and they're trying to work something out. So I think there is an incredible, you know, like opportunity for Africans and African artists to use technology to their advantage. But also it's really just about interrogating and probing how to be cautious about some of the pitfalls of technology and how sometimes they might work against us. I think right now, especially in the age of all these, you know, like challenges on social media, something like, you know, let's say Don't Rush, right? That really popularized the song, right? And Afrobeat. I think we need to move past just the hype of, you know, the viral video on social media. How can we get the popularity or the virality around some of these social media trends and the highlighting of Afrobeat, Amapiano, and other African genres? How do we move from hype to a place where it's actively benefiting artists, where it's actually leading to artists getting money, right? If I think back to Master KG and his smash hit song, Jerusalem, right? That became a viral trend, not just in South Africa or on the continent, but across the entire globe. And when I interviewed him, one of the questions I asked him was, with all the popularity that you've been receiving with the videos and the ad campaigns, right? A lot of corporations here in South Africa were now co-opting a lot of that as part of their advertising. I asked him, are you actually monetizing this viral moment? You know, and he was a little bit evasive about it, only to find out a couple of weeks after that interview that, you know, there was a chunk of money that he was not receiving, whether it was ad agencies that were music, but not, you know, like paying him for it, or, you know, just other sort of
We're on
stages, kind of utilizing his music for their own commercial means, but not actually making sure that they're compensating him. So I think technology is a great tool. It can be used to unify, not just within music, but outside of it. But I am cautious about how we need to move from it just being a popular or a viral moment and having a lot of hype around it, and making sure that whatever popularity is surrounding, whether it's a song or a genre or an artist, that they're actually able to monetize from those moments, and it's not just another fleeting social media trend.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it was interesting because sometimes you'd find, like, you know, if you knew what was really moving things on the continent, or, you know, in diasporic circles, sometimes like a one-hit wonder would pop up, and then they would take all of the attention around, you know, Afrobeats or dancehall, and it wouldn't be the artist that you would think, you know, would be the leader of these movements. It would be, you know, that one hit. And again, it goes back to Colin's extractionary model. But I think that, you know, technology is also very dangerous, because I find that, you know, a lot of conversation that's been happening recently has been people running back to their kind of tribal, you know, ethnic, you know, smaller groups. You know, I think of the ADOS movement, and, you know, the diasporic wars that you know, people are, you know, battling, and, you know, really taking away from the power of this cross-fertilization that's been happening. And I think there's a lot of reactionary forces that don't want to see a global Black unity that, you know, is clearly we're on the precipice of, because you see this expansion of African influence on everything, you know, fashion, cinema, music, etc. And there's a lot of agents out there that are, you know, pushing, you know, like the xenophobic movements in South Africa, for example, where, you know, these retrograde instincts kind of rear their ugly heads. You know, I leave it to the panel, you know, if anyone wants to speak to that and what they see as a solution to the kind of binary quality of, you know, social media, where, you know, the extremes get pushed to the front. You know, if you say something outrageous or something that will cause, you know, an emotional reaction, you know, you get more hits. Msia, Colin. Oh, and here we have Seyi, Shay. How are you?
Shay.
Hi guys, hello everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. Please forgive me. I'm in the middle of the promotion of my new single that just dropped a few days ago. So I'm being dragged left, right, and center. But it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you. I'm here now. Thank you guys. Sorry.
Absolutely. I mean, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? And I'll give you the question that we started with. I was saying that the premise of this conversation is kind of what Fela said, that music is a weapon, and we're all kind
it's like social media is the weapon now, to be honest.
Right.
It's more of the weapon than music all of a sudden. But it's just the age we live in, I guess. My name is Shay. I'm a singer, songwriter, actress, entertainer. I live in Nigeria. I was born and raised in the UK. And, half of my life I was raised in Nigeria too. Currently in Nigeria. It's a pleasure to be here again.
As an artist, do you say social media is the weapon? What do you find that liberating, or is it difficult to be judged by your view count?
It's really easy to be judged by your counts, your views, by social media, Twitter probably being the worst. But of course, it's a platform for expression, a platform where everybody has freedom of speech to a certain degree. But it's also a platform that can either make you or break you, and can also, but I mean, as an artist, I use it to promote, also to share what's on my mind. I've been dragged on social media a lot. I'm always dragged on social media anyway, because I kind of still have a British Nigerian mentality, which is quite honest and open. And in Nigeria, maybe a few years ago when I first came out here to settle, females having a freedom of speech and kind of being as honest and open and frank as I was and I am was a no-no. So I used to get dragged a lot, and I'm still being dragged. Like I trend almost every week now in Nigeria, especially because of this TV show that I'm doing, Nigerian Idols, where I'm the judge. But it's either, me having quite a harsh or real honest opinion of someone that came to audition, or maybe just giving my opinion, or I use it also now for my new song that I just dropped. But like I said, I feel like social media is the weapon, probably more than the music now. Yeah, because if you're not really like popular on social media, or if your music doesn't really go that far. So I don't know. It's debatable, but that's just my opinion.
Do you think that that is a blessing or a curse to social media?
Social media, like I said, it can be either or. It's really how you use it. Yeah, it's really how you use it.
How do you then decide what you emphasize? Like, when you make music, are you thinking about social media, or is it once you make the music, you have to figure out how to use that?
When I make the music, I'm thinking about the people around the globe that I want to reach, and that I know that it's social media that is going to do that job for me. Distribution, because even distribution are using social media now. So you have strategies where you can pay for ads, where you can literally reach every corner of the world, depending on how much money you put behind YouTube or Instagram or Facebook. So like I said, anybody can have a hit song. Anybody can have a hit song, but it's not really a hit in the grand scheme of things if everybody hasn't heard it, or if masses haven't heard it. It could just be a hit in your team, in your country, in your city, in your town. But until it gets trending on social media or talked about or hits, views, likes, it's not a hit. That is just the reality. Like, there are so many songs that are bigger, better potentially than some of the #1 songs on the Billboard right now, sound-wise, melodically, that we would even vibe to more and enjoy more than what is in the top 10 or top 100 of the Billboard, but we probably would never hear them because they don't have the power of social media behind it.
Right. Colin, do you find the same, that you might have a song that's higher quality, that doesn't have the social media magic? where
Uh,
would be more social media.
No, and somebody can also definitely kind of put me right. I may be wrong, but that's just my experience.
Look, I think social media is important. It's like a tool. We've always had tools, right? Whether it was radio, now it's social media. We've always had tools, and I think they're important. I think they play a particular role in marketing. I think it makes artists accessible. It makes a conversation between artists and fans very accessible, but could also be very toxic because there is no barrier anymore, right? So you're hit with everything from every side and every opinion, and you really have to be strong and not to go down those comments, because as a creative, it can destroy you if you're not mindful. So I think it's a tool. It's a great tool. It's a tool that connects us. But I think what's more important is the community that we need to build from the diaspora, whether it's the Caribbean, whether it's South America, whether it's Africa. We need to build community. You know what I mean? And I think that's what makes us strong, right? It's about. I'll give you an example. Oxlade came down to South Africa about a couple of weeks ago, and Teleman took him around to show him his essay from a history perspective, not the clubs, not the chicks, but here's Durban, here's Soweto, here's what's going on socially, politically, here's what's happening in the space, right? And we can go make some music. That one intersection of one young Nigerian from the hood, another Nigerian, one South African from the hood, a Nigerian from the hood, came up from absolutely nothing to get to where they are, and they have a conversation. That's critical to me, right? That's what needs to happen, because I'm telling you, African Americans rappers are not actually talking to, and some are, some are having a conversation with the African artists, but it's not a wholesome conversation sometimes. It's this American arrogance conversation that comes off, right? Where Americans kind of see this thing happen in Africa and they want to dip their head in and pull from it and make it theirs and leave everything else behind it, right? So I think it is a lot around community. I think it is using social media to build community. I think for a very long time, being Jamaican, our staple was reggae and dancehall. But if you look at Tehran and all these guys that are super producers, right? They're super producers writing for Beyonce, Ariana Grande, all of these massive artists, right? All of these massive artists, right? They're Jamaican. Jamaican is more pop music than anything. If you know Jamaica, we're pop. Celine Dion will get literally trampled in Jamaica if she ever landed. Where country music is big. You go to Kenya, country music is the second biggest genre in Kenya. So what I'm saying is that what needs to happen now with social is that we got to support our artists beyond Afrobeat, right? Because I'm telling you, there's voices. I'm hearing. I heard a kid a couple of days ago, and I can't think of his name now. I have to look at my phone. But I heard a kid from Nigeria that will murder Weekend. Murder him. Like his voice, I was just like, what the hell is this? Right? So there's so much that we have to offer. And I think that we just need to use social media to amplify that. We need to build community. We need to travel. That is, and COVID obviously has hurt a lot of us from that. But the more that we travel, the more that we engage, the more that I'm only putting out R&B projects other than Nasty C's hip hop project this year. Everything I'm putting out is R&B. Everything I'm touching is R&B.
Yeah.
Because I'm betting that's the new. I'm betting on it. 100%. The whole kitchen sink.
I'm putting out an R&B album in 2020. I'm putting
out an R&B album that doesn't forget Afrobeat.
I'm
not trying to make an American Afrobeat album. All I'm trying to do is add more melody, more lyrics, more bridge hook in a Afrobeat format with people actually singing and not being technically recorded, right? Like, so singers, actually people that can sing, right? And I think it's going to be a massive wave. And just to go back, I think social media, I think all these platforms are beautiful. I think they're absolutely wonderful. They help us. I get when guys say we need to build our own platforms. Some of it, I think we missed that. We got to go build something else. You know what I mean? We got to find something else because we've missed that boat. You know, so when some guy comes along and go, I'm gonna do Mdundo in East Africa, I'm like, that ship has sailed, hasn't it? Like, well, how do we compete with that globally? But I get it. And you know, every new platform that pops up, I make sure that we license our music to them to support them because I think there is a bit of self-pride and cultural thing that happens around that space. But I think right now what we need to all be focused on is how do we bring the power of Africa and this youth generation to these platforms to make, because they only pay attention to economics, right? So that's all that changes the game, right? It's just money, it's just economics. If we can show the power of the continent in an economic way on these platforms we're owning, and they're seeing right now when Spotify launched across Africa, the expectation is that Nigeria was going to be the country that was going to blow it out the box. I tell you, that's not the case. It was Kenya. Why was it Kenya? Because they put M-Pesa on Spotify, right? And they put M-Pesa on Spotify. Once they did that, every Kenyan was like, oh, finally, somebody thought about me. I'm not an afterthought. I'm not being asked to do things the way you do things. You're coming to my house. So when you come to my house, you eat at the table the way we eat at the table. If we eat with our hands, when you come to my house, you're going to eat with your hands because that's my house. So when Spotify came into Kenya, they came with M-Pesa. They saw the hugest spike of any of all those countries they launched in. So I think, yes, we're starting to get a bit more power, right? Because platforms coming in are saying, okay, we're not going to just try to do it the American way or the European way. We're going to figure out what the local way is and bring that into our space, right? So I think that's been tremendous. I think now when you have a Diamond Platinum about to drop an album in a couple of weeks, let's see when Diamond now doubled down on Spotify in East Africa. Now what happens to a kid that puts out, every video he puts out is 10 million views for the worst video that he's not paying attention to, right? Now let's see what and I say it about East Africa because I talk a lot about East Africa just because the cost of data is so much cheaper than any place else on the continent. And the
critical aspect.
Yeah, and it's critical. And tech is culturally East Africa. Right. So tech and IT is a cultural thing, right? So those guys are on. And so I'm really interested to see what the next 6 months look like around digital and around engagement. I'm curious to see if we can empower, because the more we empower, then the more independent labels that are going through distributors can own on to our masters, that we can hold on to our space. The more that publishing will become a factor, right? The more that direct payments directly from the platforms directly into the labels are going to start to happen. So you're going to see this whole massive wave. You got Salty Soul,
right,
putting out 4 individual solo records this year. We're going to test the system to see if we can bring this country and everyone along with us, right? So I think it's an interesting time, but I think, again, the UK is critical. No one would ever say that the UK is critical. It's the gateway to the rest of the world, right? Because of its population of Africans and Caribbeans. That's what it is. Right. But here's the biggest thing that we're missing, guys. Here's the biggest thing, and Obi and I talk about this all the time. What we're missing is that the music is dope. But what we're not doing, which Jamaica did so well, is that, and what America did, hip hop did, that we are not bringing our culture with us. We're giving the music, but we leave everything that makes us dope behind us. So we're not bringing, when you see Jamaica, we came with the hair, we came with the weed, we came with the color, we came with everything that was Jamaica. When hip hop came, why hip hop is sticky is because hip hop, like it or don't like it, it brought the streets, it brought everything that was us with it. What Africa is missing is that we get on that plane and all we bring is that song, and we try our best to Americanize or Europeanize ourselves, and we don't bring our culture. And what those fans, what those 100,000 white people in the audience, when they go see Jay, what they want is Jay's culture. That's what turns them on. Absolutely. That's what we're missing. Africa's not bringing our culture.
Absolutely. And I think I saw Msia nodding.
That's so true. Oh my God. Sorry.
Go ahead, Seyi.
No, I just want to also say that in terms of collaborations, I also want to speak to
I agree. I agree with Colin 100%.
The collaborations between artists on the continent. I think social media has really impacted that as well. So when you look at kind of like from like just the last 10 years since 2010, as more and more Africans on the continent have gotten online on social, specifically on social media, we've seen the number of collaborations between artists increase. So, you know, you have more, you had a few every year happening. I mean, especially artists in like kind of the bigger countries that had more access, South African artists and Nigerian artists, but you're seeing a lot more. There still aren't as many. So like if I interview an artist in Ghana and I say, you know, who are some of your, you know, favorite MCs, they will always list Ghanaian artists and US artists, and maybe Nigerian or South African. They won't talk about Senegal. They won't talk about Kenya. They are not aware of what's happening in other West African countries except for Nigeria. And sometimes I'll hear an artist in Kenya and say, wow, this artist should really do a collaboration with this artist in Ghana. And every once in a while, you'll get, you know, an artist that will reach out and say that they're working on a project and they're looking for suggestions for artists. And it's always great to be able to say, here are artists. You know, if you hear something you like, let me know and I can try to get you their contact info. That's always a wonderful thing to be able to do. I know with the class, I teach a class, Hip Hop in Africa, every spring, and it's my favorite class by far. The blog we have, the Hip Hop in Africa blog, the students pick a country, and we've got, you know, countries like Zambia, Malawi, but we also have South Africa, Nigeria, and we also have Senegal, Egypt. So we not only have the Anglophone, but we also have the Francophone, Lusophone, and they have to do a blog post on a hip hop artist from that country on the blog every week. And so I find out, like the majority of the artists I've written about, I found out about from my students doing blog posts about them. And they find some of the most incredible MCs. Sampa the Great, who is, I can't say enough about her. She's great. She's really been doing a lot of great things, you know, on the Australian scene. But like just seeing all of these artists, and I'm just like, this person's over here, that person's over there. And they may collaborate. Like I know Sampa the Great did a collaboration with Jungle Pussy, but you know, it would be great if she did a collaboration, you know, with a South African MC or a Ghanaian MC, but they're not connecting. So it's happening more, and social media is allowing that, and digital technology is allowing them to like send beats and tracks and all of that kind of stuff. But I would love to see more collaboration, like more Pan-African collaborations between your, you know, African artists of African, to be very clear, when I say Pan-African, artists of African descent in Europe, the US, and the continent. I would love to see more kind of those kind of collaborations. That would be really, really
and I think those are happening kind of organically.
Mm-hmm.
But Nigerians do that a lot though.
Yeah.
Not as much. I wish there were like a lot more. It's just hard to. It's also, and somebody also posed the question, how can people find out about new music? I know like the Spotify list, but Apple Music's African hip hop playlist is decent. It's not the best like curation, but it is a decent curation of playlists. There are podcasts. Of course, I'm gonna, you know, always kind of plug my podcast, but there are other African hip hop podcasts. There are other there are Afrobeats podcasts. There are other, you know, different playlists on other platforms that curate African music, whether it be hip hop or Afrobeats or reggae or what have you, whatever genres you're looking at. So there are other ways to kind of find out what some of the new music is out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Colin's point about, you know, the next wave for African artists and for, diasporic artists, to directly get payments for their music and for people to start bringing everything to the table. I think with where we're seeing like things happening in the cryptocurrency space and NFTs, and people having more awareness of what it means to own your masters. This is happening in the US, like, very intensely. And then, Nas and Jay-Z just did a record with Khaled, kind of talking about their billionaire status and how they've taken care of the business of culture, and they monetize their brand, and they monetize their lifestyle, so that they actually benefit from what they create. I think that's the next wave that's going to generate all kinds of new cultural works, because if someone can directly get payments to their own account for the song they put out or the film they put out, that's going to change things immensely. I think speed things up as well. And I think we're coming to the end of this. So Rufaro, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that element, like what you see coming next.
I think, definitely that's a space to be considered. Obviously, there are quite a number of things that still have to be figured out. It has worked for a number of artists, not necessarily on the continent, but in the US. But, some of them have been in the space for quite a while. So they've been able to kind of figure out some of the tricks and tips of the space. But we still need to, safeguard against copyright infringement, things like intellectual property, theft, fraud, right? But the conversation is very important, particularly in terms of ownership, as well as artists being paid for their work, because in as much as we talk about this all the time, royalties and being adequately compensated for your work among artists, African and otherwise, is still a problem. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had one of our veteran Kwaito stars, Eugene Tetwa. He was part of the group back in probably like the 80s and 90s era, Trompies. They were largely behind popularizing the Bansula culture in South Africa. And, he was holding a solo protest at the SAMRO offices, that's the South African Music Rights Organization. And he was saying that he hadn't been paid royalties for his work since 1988. So that was over 3 decades, right, of royalties that he just hadn't received. There was also DJ Mapurisa, who maybe 2 weeks back came out and said, I didn't get my royalties for working on Questa's Good, right? So you have veteran artists like Eugene, and you have a contemporary and, a high flyer like DJ Mapurisa still talking about the same issue, and that's not being compensated for their work. So I think in terms of this crypto art space and making sure that we create a space where people can, like you said, have the opportunity to have the money for their work directly transferred into their accounts, into their pockets. I think that's extremely important, especially insofar as African artists are concerned, where, the conversation around ownership is also still quite a thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, we should have our last words about it, but I think the revolution again is price point, understanding how to value our culture in a way that really truly reflects our influence and our power. Bob Marley created a kingdom with his songs, and his family are royalty now, and they've been able to translate that influence that he's had globally into another kind of lifestyle for his children, and they continue that tradition. And I think the same thing has happened with Fela. When we really talk about what's valuable, whether Mark Zuckerberg deserves to be one of the richest people versus, you know, the content that that drives his machines, you know, we have to really start reassessing, you know, what's really truly valuable to us, you know. I think what's so exciting about right now is that people are becoming aware of it. And more importantly, that the unity that's now happening with this, the great African expansion of influence should come with economic, an economic reflection of that expansion. You know, I would have, you know, everyone give their last words and talk to that. You know, I don't know if Seyi is still with us. Seyi? No, she's not there. So Colin, Msia.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. Look, I've, you know, Rob, OB, you guys know we've been here for a long time, dedicated to the space, and I've seen a lot of growth. We have a lot of growth to go, right? I think that we have a great responsibility to this generation to give information away for free. I think which is I think is critically important. I think we have a responsibility to nurture, to protect the ones that do not know, or the ones that kind of don't have all the information yet. So I think it's really important to protect. And I think we just have to continue to collaborate and just be clear on our power, right? We are extremely powerful. You know what I mean? We are extremely, extremely powerful. And I think Obi and both you, Rob, you guys have experienced this, that then I know 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I started coming to Africa, guys in North America thought I was crazy. When I moved here, I had many people tell me that, you know, I had lost the plot, right? But I welcome those people when they get off the plane and land now. I welcome them with open arms. Because we're all not going to get it at the same time. We're going to get it at different times. I don't care when you get it, as long as you get it, right? So I think it's just an incredible time. I think that what I really, really want to stress is that we're storytellers. That's really all we are at the end of the day. And music is one of the tools that we've used to tell stories. And I think that we just need to make sure that we bring our culture with us when we go. Not just backstage, but in everything that we do, in every event that we do, the way we dress and feel and everything else is key. We are the center of creative, period. End of conversation. They've extracted, you know, 400 years ago. They continue to extract. We're going to continue to either sit here and go to another extraction model, or we're going to put boots on the ground and stand hard. And I think that's my note. For everyone that's in this game, you should have 1 foot on the continent and 1 foot wherever else. But make sure you have 1 foot on the continent. Make sure you buy a piece of land or something and you're here. And you're just not, you know, you're not looking at it through social media or anything else, because that's just half the story.
Right.
So
I want to highlight something you said earlier, which is that social media is the starting point. You know, social media should be the instigator for the real life, real, you know, 4D connection that you make when you stand on the ground, when you actually meet people, when you talk and create community. I thought that was, you know, very, very critical point. And I leave the floor to Rufaro and Msia to the last words.
I'll say that, you know, coming from the kind of the academic space and being a hip hop head, and also being, you know, from, you know, coming from the continent, or just really being Black period, and kind of knowing how academia has taken from our culture quite a bit, having that sense of responsibility in writing about the culture and being accurate in my representation of it. And so when we created started the podcast a while ago, we were on episode 68. Part of it was to bring hip hop in Africa, specifically in Africa, to this kind of academic platform or in this academic space. And so this past spring with the class, for the first time, we did live recordings of the podcast in the class where the students were able to ask questions of the artists. And so they, you know, got to talk to Gigi Lemaine and Sampa the Great and Edem from Ghana. And so they got the chance to talk to these amazing artists, and they actually, it ended up where these artists also kind of passed, you know, all this knowledge and experience, and it worked in so many different ways. And so I think that having that responsibility of kind of representation. So while I'm in that space and, you know, kind of, I think hip hop has all these different elements, fashion and, you know, DJing and graffiti. I look at academia as so many of us who are, you know, hip hop heads who are representing hip hop in that space, kind of also forging that as an element. I mean, Howard University right now is in the process of creating a hip hop studies program. Whether it would be a minor or a major, I don't know. We're also trying to put together or trying to build an African hip hop archive. You know, Harvard has a hip hop archive, Cornell, but you know, I'm really trying to push an African hip hop archive. So the argument could be, well, it's why at a Western university? My argument is it's an HBCU, and so if effectively it's an African institution, just happens to be in the West. You know, I know there could be a debate around that, but I want to say, you know, meeting a lot of folks here, we definitely plan to do that platform again. It works so well with the live recordings. I'm definitely looking forward to linking up with folks. You know, we're always, you know, really looking to connect with artists, specifically MCs, specifically hip hop artists for the show, to do interviews. And so, you know, folks would love, you know, like to connect. I know a lot of you are representing hip hop artists specifically. You know, you can check the podcast out to see, you know, the caliber of artists that we've interviewed before. Again, you know, Sampa's been on there, Blitz the Ambassador, Manifest. So there are some, you know, everyone from someone like that to artists that you've never heard of in your life. And so we try to like, you know, so I would love to link up with folks and get some ideas for artists to have on the show.
Right, and to the, you know, the whole idea of, you know, university in the West being, I think, you know, Africa is a state of consciousness, you know, and, you know, we find it manifest in every part of the world, and really the globe is ours. So it's not a question of, you know, being in one place or one space. It's, I think that the fact is that we have to claim our power and be where we are, you know. Rufaro, I'll give you the last word.
I think from my end, it's, you know, and I think this has been the case over the past couple of years, you know, we keep hearing about how, you know, all eyes are on Africa, you know, but I think when we really delve into what that means, I think for so long we've been seen as this monolithic and homogeneous continent, right? Often seen as just one country, right? And not our individual and respective 54 countries with very rich and diverse cultures, very different soundscapes. And so for me, I think we would do ourselves a disservice if we don't, I suppose, go away in terms of just dispelling this narrative that there's just one sound from Africa. It's not just Afrobeats like we spoke about in the beginning. It's not just Afrobeats, and it's certainly not just, you know, hip hop. There's Amapiano, which is probably going to be the biggest, you know, the next big international export. I think it already is in some ways, you know, music from the DRC. I want to see, you know, genres from Senegal, Morocco, from Eritrea, you know, from all over the continent. And it's not to say that every genre is going to become international. I don't think it has to, but I do think that we have a duty to make sure that there is representation in our music above and beyond Afrobeats and, you know, hip hop. Right. Personally, you know, in as much as I'm extremely proud that, you know, we have the music heavyweights that we have, the Nasties, the Davidos, Tiwa, Tims, Sarkodie, all of those people, I particularly am always interested in the new wave, right? How do we make sure that we're hearing fresh, relevant voices, right? And not from the same countries. I think because of Afrobeat and because of Amapiano, South Africa, Nigeria, and because of, I suppose, their music industries and the way that they're set up, they tend to be the more dominant in terms of, you know, African countries kind of leading the music forefront. But outside of Sauti Sol from Kenya, I want to hear a lot more upcoming young artists from Kenya, right? I want to hear a lot more upcoming artists from the Congo outside of Fally Ipupa, right? I want to hear a lot more names and sounds and music from young upcoming artists from countries we don't necessarily cover in the media. We're not necessarily interviewing, we're not necessarily reviewing or even scouting for talent. And I want to make sure that we are well represented as a continent. And I think that goes, you know, far beyond just, you know, my duty as a writer and someone in the media and looking at, you know, what's popping in culture. I think it's the onus really is on everybody who's associated with the music industry to make sure that we're doing a good enough job. We're doing justice by the continent in terms of adequately representing as many Africans as we can outside of those that we are, you know, currently seeing dominating the space. So yeah.
Well, thank you for a great conversation, guys. I thought we covered a lot of bases, but we could probably be here for another 5 hours. But I thank you for your participation, and I think that's it. Obi, you want to?
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. I think Obi's internet is probably died. Obi, are you there? But thank you, everybody. This is like this is phenomenal. This is great. And I think for me, the one of the greatest thing that we had today was like, it's our responsibility to give information out for free. I think that's one of the key things. Giving information is really important. And one of the things we're doing at Africa Self Power is trying to do that, but also to create African voices, Black voices as, you know, being part of the global community and like being leaders and thought leaders. And the breadth of our culture as Africans, as Black people around the world is really important. And that's the whole point of Africa Self Power. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. This was wonderful, Colin. This was great. Like, we really enjoyed listening to you. Obi, do you want to say something? This is your thing.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank everybody for coming on. I really enjoyed the panel. Professor just taking me back with all the gems on the hip hop MCs I need to go and check out. I think Rufaro made a really deep point at the end about this discovery of the new artists and the next sort of generation of breaking artists. Colin is just speaking, you know, he's speaking the truth for me in terms of how we leverage and use the knowledge, you know. And then Rob, of course, you know, Rob, thanks a lot for putting it together. I'm just looking forward to what we can all do going forward together, and welcome you guys to Africa Soft Power faculty and family, because now that you've done the panel, you're part of us forever. So we're never going to let you go.
Amen. And before you guys go, I just want to say something very quickly about Msia. Like, you are actually, I mean, everybody in this panel is fantastic, but there's something in particular that the reason we really wanted you was this whole being a professor of hip hop. It's come up a lot in terms of, you know, people forcing their kids to study engineering and law and all of that stuff. And it's really important that we as Africans and we as Black people see that there's a whole bunch of things you could do around music, around sports, around film, around writing, all of these things. So it's really important that we have role models like you and Rufaro, Colin, Rob. Like, this is really important conversation, and the level that we've had this conversation at shows that we have history, we have depth. We don't all have to be engineers to actually do great. So that's also really important for Africa Self Power, that we actually, our culture, this is something that's really important. Shay is back. Great stuff. Shay, nice to see you. We're just rounding up, so you can say something.
Network problems, network issues. You saw I was in the car when I joined. The network color, you know, like my country. Honestly. But as soon as I rushed in the house, I connected to the Wi-Fi and jumped straight back on. So I'm just catching the tail end of this again.
So you can say the bye. We're just rounding up, so you can say goodbye to your fans.
So yeah, you know, everybody that's tuned in and joined in, I'm sure you've been enlightened. You've gotten some history. You've got some insight. I'm Shay. It's an honor to be part of this panel. OkayAfrica, shout out to you, my brother, one of my mentors, and my co-judge on Nigerian Idol, the only guy that makes sense actually, and doesn't get hate tweets. They all love him. They hate me. But thank you so much for having me, Kuru, and Rob, Marriott, and Rufaro, Colin. I learned a lot from you, actually, Colin. I'm telling you, like, some deep insight there. And Dr. Msia Kibona Clark. It's been a pleasure.
Colin's a professor. We love him.
Yes.
Colin, we're having Nasty C, right? We're bringing Nasty C next week, Saturday. I'm saying it out loud.
I have a song with Nasty C, actually, Colin. We did the Down South record for MTV Sugar, was it? So, and that was a big record.
You see?
He's on mute. He's talking
You're
away.
mute.
Colin, you're mute. Colin, you're muted.
He probably didn't hear any of that. He's probably doing better.
So I heard everything, and thank you. Obi, Obi told me 2004 at a dinner that it's our responsibility to pass on the information we had. It's our opportunity to make generational change, and I've never forgotten that conversation. It's the guiding point for everything that I do. We're on our way out, right? Obi and I probably have another 50 years to go, but we're on our way that way, right? So I think it's really critically important that we pass on information and we leave something, and we leave a legacy of information, and we lift as we rise, right? That's just really what it comes down to. So definitely, and we'll keep pushing, and we'll make change. Obi knows, 2004, we were at the beginning of the thing. Today, we're way further than we were before. So
100.
I always want to say, we're always thinking about what we could be doing, but sometimes we need to take a moment and say what we have done. It's been a lot, right? And if it wasn't for Obi, none of us would have gotten to this point. He fought this game all the way through until we all got it. And we're here now. We're going to continue to do it and continue to push. I brought my 2 kids from LA to live down here because that's their responsibility to continue on. So let's rock and roll.
Do this.
All right.
Peace.
Love y'all.
Thanks for sharing.
I love y'all.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Ciao. Thanks, everybody. We're going to get your new single, Shay. Great job. Thanks so much.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Girl power. Again, this is a revolution. This is an evolution. It's a great time to be alive. 2 females, big on their game in the same continent, collaborating and coming together. I haven't seen it before, but I'm glad to be alive to see it now. So thank you, guys.
Love you guys. Cheers. Bye.